Back again.
Back again.
Back again.
That's actually a great place to start. Any takeaways from last year?
It's like a game of chess at over 150 mile an hour.
This is Formula E. You never have everything under control, or
That's
maybe
crazy.
yeah. And again, like if you don't drive like at 100% or even more, honestly, like you cannot fight for the top 10. So
There's certain things that you can do and certain things you can't do. So Formula E is very good at making sure that everybody stays within a certain window.
I'm gutted that everybody's feeling optimistic. I want it just to be us.
In whatever the future motorsport looks like, I think Formula E will be a part of that.
Okay, so for the last couple of years, I've been watching Formula E, and there's two big questions that keep bubbling up at the surface for me. Number one, is Formula E the most relevant motorsport series that we have right now? If you think of it, the Formula One R&D laboratory used to be where all of the next innovation that we would find on our road cars, especially using ICEs, where that would come from. But now with the increasing volume of EVs, maybe the research and development coming out of Formula E is potentially more relevant to what's happening in our road cars. That's number one. And number two, is Formula E essentially the future of racing, or is it just another kind of series? And these are some of the questions I've been asking up and down the paddock. Now, for the last couple of years, I've been more actively watching Formula E, and in full transparency, at the end of 2022, Formula E came to me and asked if I would want to come on board as a content creator and learn more about the series. So as a result of that, I've been able to attend a handful of races. I've been able to talk with people up and down the paddocks, the team principals, the drivers, the mechanics, the engineers, and learn more about the series firsthand. And as I mentioned, I'm really interested in Formula E in a big part because of the technology that is being developed, both inside of the cars, but also all around the series. And obviously, I'm very curious what this all means for the future of mobility, but also what this means for the future of the EV cars that we are increasingly buying and using. And also potentially some of the misconceptions that we have around EVs. Now, there's a handful of things that I've particularly enjoyed around Formula E and a handful of things that maybe took me by surprise. Number one is the amount of phenomenal wheel-to-wheel on-track battles that we are seeing almost at every single race.
And I think the racing is going to be exciting as it ever has been, more exciting maybe than last season, and I thought that was the pinnacle. So.
Ask any weekend up and down the paddock who's going to win, and most people say we have no idea. That is not true for most motorsport series, and certainly not true for Formula One right now. Number three, it's been interesting talking with the new OEMs entering the series, those that have left, why they're joining, and what they hope to take out of being part of this series. Number four, as I mentioned before, the amount of technology and software that's being built inside the car is absolutely fascinating to me. Number five, maybe more surprisingly, it took some getting used to the garages in Formula E, as opposed to NASCAR, Indy, and specifically Formula One. It's very different. It's a lot quieter, but it's not quiet. There's a lot less activity happening because they're on pit stops. It's a lot of people, or a lot more people behind laptops, so it's a fascinating environment to be in. Now, we know that a lot of what we see in our road cars today came from motorsports and a variety of different motorsport series. For example, many basic tyre designs are an evolution of what we saw on track in racing series. A lot of the safety measures that we now see in our road cars were initially designed to keep the drivers safe while racing. The use of carbon fibre as something a lot lighter but also a lot stronger, something that we see a lot on the Formula E cars and the Formula One cars, has also made its way into our road cars. As well as disc brakes, paddle shifters, active suspensions, and even a little rear view mirror initially came from racing. So racing technology has undoubtedly shaped the road cars that we use every day. And if F1 used to be the R&D laboratory for what spilled over into our road cars, does that mean that Formula E is now our research laboratory for all the things that we are seeing in EVs?
The underlying reason why I'm in Formula E is because I truly believe we are going through a transition in the way we move society towards electrification. And this is a great laboratory.
I feel like it's like an iceberg. We're only seeing the tip of the iceberg right now. There's so much more potential that can come from this technology. We're probably only 10, 15 years into it in terms of on the planet.
And think about it. Most motorsport series today are still using ICE technology, a technology that is incredibly old, a technology that we have probably discovered almost everything there is to know about the ICE technology. And it's probably not going to evolve that much further. And let's not forget that the first commercially successful internal combustion engine was developed by Etienne Lenoir around 1860, so a long time ago. But with EVs, we are just at the start of that journey and the technology discovery. And who knows where we'll be in 10 years, 5 years, or even 6 months from now? And as Bloomberg mentioned at the start of this year, there are many factors to take into account when looking at the growth and adoption of EVs. Now, they expect global EV sales, i.e. battery electrics and plug-in hybrids, to increase 21% in 2024, which brings us to 16.7 million, with 70% of those being fully electric. Now, the growth and adoption will of course vary from the United States to Europe, even to Asia, based on the different incentives that we have, tax schemes that we may be having, and all the different legislation at play. And actually, India also saw a growth in adoption back in 2023. And here's the thing, it's not just about the tech transfer, it's also about the knowledge transfer. Listen to what Ian James, team principal at the Neom McLaren team, has to say. And honestly, at this point, I should probably release the entire conversation that we had, because there were so many interesting things being shared in this discussion.
And I think although McLaren automotive in the past, I mean, super sports cars, hypercars, and so on and so forth, a lot of that's been around the combustion engine. We've seen the shift now towards hybrid. I think inevitably you're going to see a shift towards EVs as well. So to work together and collaborate on that is going to be quite exciting.
It always seems fun, like what can you learn from the actual racing department and actually say we're doing this. It's fun to go racing, it's fun to win championships. It's also nice to have that legacy of we're changing.
And I think there's two levels to it as well. You've got your technology transfer, which is kind of the holy grail. That's taking things, developing here that you can develop harder and faster because you haven't got the constraints that you've got for passenger cars. And then seeing that then translate into the road car side of things. But actually, before you get to that, you've got the knowledge transfer. You know, ultimately the physics, the engineering challenges are the same. So the way that we approach that on the racing side and then on the racing side, you can learn from each other. And I think
I feel like that's the biggest thing you've got going for you. You've got Formula One, Formula E, Indy, Extreme,
esports, the whole lot is
You've got the whole...
And for some automotive brands, that alignment through and through is incredibly obvious. Take Jaguar, for example, who's going full electric by 2025.
There's like a brand alignment through and through for you guys.
But it's real. It's not just it's not just a sticker on a car. It has depth. We're here innovating amazing EV technology, but at the same time we're also showcasing the benefit of EVs, showcasing why zero emissions is important, but also that there's not a compromise to choosing EVs. And I think we're over that era now. Right? People get that EVs are high performance, they're efficient. So we're over that question. Now it's about creating a great sport with a propulsion which is most relevant to the cars that you and I will drive in the future.
So how did we get here? Formula E is celebrating its 10th season this year, which means that it's both still very much in its infancy, but at the same time it's just celebrated its first decade as a motorsport series, which feels like it's established as a series and it's here to stay. Very briefly, and as noted on the Formula E website, the idea of an all-electric single-seater racing series started back in 2011 on the back of a napkin with a bunch of notes between the now founder of the series, Alejandro Agag, and the previous FIA president, Jean Todt. Now, the founding mission of Formula E was for it to be able to race through the streets of some of the most iconic cities, essentially bringing racing to the people and highlighting mobility inside these cities. It also promised a grid with some of the best racing drivers and some of the most incredible names in motorsports. But he also wanted to show what sustainable mobility was possible when we focused on EVs. And what's kind of crazy is it only took about 3 years for Alejandro Agag and Jean Todt to take this idea and turn it into a fully fledged racing series, with the first season starting in 2014. And now, in season 10, we are in the second season of the Gen 3 car. So we've had 3 generations of what this electric single-seater could look like. But really, there is no one more suited to talk about the genesis and day one of Formula E than driver Lucas di Grassi himself. He's currently driving for the ABT Cupra team, but more importantly, he has been here since day one, and as some would put it, since day zero. And I was fortunate to catch up with him during the first race of the season in Mexico City to talk all things Formula E, day one, day zero, the Gen 3 car, but also that spillover from the motorsport series into our road cars.
Let's say the next step on this story is basically a good friend of mine, Alejandro, which I drove for him in Formula 2.
I didn't know that.
4 years before Formula E was created, and we won the championship together. So we became good friends. So when he got the license from FIA to do Formula E, he had no clue about what to do with the license, like how the car should look like, or which track should we race.
And you come in.
So he called me and said, I have this new project, which is basically making electric racing cars.
Okay.
And because of the first reason, I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna help. And so since day zero, I was first developing the company, helping to develop the company with Alejandro, and then I signed with Abt,
Yeah.
and then start racing, and 10 years later, I'm here.
Now, the series has seen some OEMs like Mercedes leave because they said that they had learned everything that they needed to learn in this moment around electrification. And it's also welcomed new teams like the McLaren team that we now have under the grid under the name Neom McLaren. As a reminder, the Formula E cars use powertrains, and the racing has a lot more to do with software and the software capabilities. Almost 80% of the performance comes from the software. So is Formula E the future of motorsports, or is it just a new and different type of racing? This is the question that I have been asking myself, and it's the question that I asked up and down the paddock. Listen to what some of the team principals and the drivers have to say.
So let me ask you this. Do you think Formula E is the future of motorsports, or is it still right now and potentially will remain a different type of racing? Or do you think this is it? This is what we can expect from motorsports moving forward?
Depends where your barometer and how long is,
Okay.
right? And if I look at between now and 2030, obviously, in some markets that you can only produce EVs from 2030, in some markets it's 2035. So between now and 2035, it's a transition. The reality is at World Championship level, beyond 2035, or even leading up to 2030, between now and 2030, the majority of the cars that will be sold in 2030 will be EVs.
Yeah.
So the fleet across the world is largely EVs. So I think Formula E is the most relevant World Championship for the technology.
That's great.
But if I look at other categories, they have a role to play. Hybrid categories have a role to play. And it's a transition. What that looks like beyond 2035, who knows? But the reality is, if your defining character is that the sport has to be relevant to manufacturers, then Formula E is the one which is most relevant. And probably the best way to put it is, if you look at the R&D budget for any major automotive firm, most of the R&D budget is going into EV and not into anything else. There may be other pockets of investment in sustainable fuels, but the reality is the majority investment is in EVs. So yeah, that tells you that Formula E continues to move into the bullseye, which is what is super exciting about this championship.
Is that what's keeping you here?
Absolutely.
After all of these years?
You're absolutely right.
So Formula E is obviously a lot more efficient than any of the other motorsport series out there, bar maybe the Autonomous Racing League, which we can talk about at another moment. And it's maybe even more relevant, a word that I've heard used a lot in the Formula E paddock. But is that enough to attract fans and keep them interested and intrigued about the series?
How do you sell on fans' efficiency when what they want is performance? How do you get people excited by Formula E? Because it's
You increase
hard.
performance.
Okay, how do you do that? You just keep at it.
A simple example is just allow us to use the front powertrain.
If I was sat up there over the course of this weekend, or rather in the Forest I think we're going to have an incredible season. I personally speaking, I mentioned before about those power unit groupings, if you like. I do think we're going to see some disruption in that. I think that's going to mean that the racing is going to be even closer this year.
What's the biggest misconception that you think people have of Formula E?
Good question. Good question. Like I would say that on TV, you don't really see the potential of the car, the speed of the car.
Yeah.
So finally, here are the couple of things that have stood out to me. Number one, it has been impressive to see just how far the series has come in just under a decade, which is really exciting because this highlights just how much further we can go in such a small period of time and just how much more technology and innovation is possible in this series, but also what this means for the spillover into the road cars that we use every day. Just listen to James Barkley, team principal at the Jaguar team, explain this so succinctly and so incredibly clearly.
That from literally concept, blank sheet of paper, to a sport with 350 million fans worldwide, racing in 4 continents, 5 continents in the future, it's only 10 years old. So again, the sport is literally an infant, and we're at that early part of nurturing this great sport.
It's crazy to think that this is 10 years. It's slowly starting to feel like this is a mature series that's here to stay and not going anywhere. Yeah. But at the same time, it's only been 10 years.
Yes.
And so
it's nothing.
It's nothing. And we've just got, and what feels like from a tech perspective is we've just gotten started with what's possible.
And there's so much. We talk a lot about the strategy of what we do next in the sport with the promoter, with the FIA. There's so much we can do, but also we want to grow the sport at the right pace, because just incurring huge costs and then not having the value back doesn't make sense either. So we're kind of growing the sport in the right way, in the right speed, but the future is super exciting.
Secondly, I have been absolutely blown away at just how complex these cars are and how complicated they clearly are to drive. Almost every single driver in Formula E will tell you this is probably the hardest car and the hardest series they've ever raced in. And when I asked Lucas di Grassi if there was one thing that he wished Formula E fans and motorsport fans truly understood about the series and racing in the series, this is what he had to say.
The difficulty of driving this car.
Yeah.
The problem we have in performance, it does actually make the car harder to drive, not easier. It's almost like you take a Formula 1 car, you put slicks in the wet.
That's a great analogy.
The performance gets worse, but it's harder to drive. The tires we have, they have so low grip, they have such a low grip that at any point on the track, I accelerate full throttle below 130, 140 kilometers per hour, I have wheel spin.
Yeah.
Not because I don't have the power to put it down, but because of the grip.
Yeah.
So we have no aerodynamics or very little, very hard tires.
Yeah.
The tires can last the whole season, not one race.
I know, that's incredible.
So the lack of, or if you see the car sliding, it's because we are on the limit of the grip, not on the limit of the performance that the car can achieve. If you compare pure performance, Formula 1 is more performant. If you compare pure efficiency, Formula E is more efficiency. What is very interesting is this ratio between performance and efficiency, which is what a road car actually gets. The road car is actually relevant when you have a ratio between performance and cost. So how much miles you get per gallon, or how much cost that technology actually, how much value that technology actually creates for the cost it has.
Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe. This is what helps me grow. But also, if you were interested in this video and you're interested about Formula E, let me know what other topics in Formula E you'd like to dive into, because I have 2 more races still to attend this year, and I have a lot more time with drivers and team principals, which means I have a lot more questions I can ask them. So let me know your thoughts and let me know your questions about Formula E. Thank you.